But anyway, I'm going to talk to you tell you a story about service delivery in South Sudan. And as I said before, I work with the Budget Strengthening Initiative, which supports ministries of finance in fragile states and does some research about the same subject. So for those of you probably know that South Sudan has had a fairly turbulent history, and the story I'm going to tell you has been over the last 4 years, and that goes through the heady days of independence to one of the biggest fiscal crises any country, I think, has ever had, with 98% of its revenues being stopped with a shutdown of oil, to sadly the re-emergence of conflict at the end of last year. So I'm going to be, I suppose, a good boy and answer the questions that were posed. And the first question, the question was, what was the problem that we started with? And I've thought back to a conversation or two conversations that I had towards the end of 2010. The first was with a man called Moses, who's the Director of Aid Coordination in the Ministry of Finance. A very principled bureaucrat, and about 6'6" or 6'8" tall as well, and a wonderful man. And he was convinced that the government of South Sudan needed budget support. Then, I think the same week, I had a conversation with the head of a donor agency, and when I mentioned that Moses was very keen on budget support, he looked aghast. And his response was, "We are interested in results for poor people." So these two opinions were pretty far apart. So why did Moses want budget support? One thing was he'd been going around lots of OECD DAC events. There's an organization called the G7 Plus of Fragile States, and they'd all been telling him that budget support was a great thing. So he thought it was a good idea. But underlying this, there was a desire within the government to move towards delivering services itself. Donors have been funding NGOs and international NGOs and other international organizations and the churches to deliver services. That's what was happening. And also, the government had their fingers burnt with a multi-donor trust fund that had, in their eyes, failed to deliver results. And why did the donors think that budget support was a bad idea, not going to deliver results? Firstly, they felt that there was no systems or capacities for government to deliver, and also there were huge fiduciary and reputational risks of giving money to the government. And they also had their fingers burnt with their first effort to work with the government, that multi-donor trust fund. So they were not keen on actually working with the government. So how was the problem addressed? How had the problem been addressed in the past? It had not been addressed. Basically, donors and the government were talking across each other. They were talking different languages. And they didn't really know what they were talking about. Moses didn't know what he was talking about when he was talking about budget support and what he was getting himself into, and whether did he really want to go there. And the donors knew little about the state of government systems and what was happening on the ground. So they were talking across each other and talking different languages. Meanwhile, on the ODI side, we'd done some research on aid and service delivery. We'd done some work looking at the political economy of service delivery and blockages and governance issues around service delivery, but we never solved the problem. And so what did we do? Remember, the ministry, ODI's role was working with, BSI's role was working with the Ministry of Finance. But we played three important roles working with the mandate of the Ministry of Finance, both in aid coordination and in budgeting. First, we played a role as a broker between government and donors. So we supported getting agreement on how donors might be able to give money in support of strengthening government-led service delivery, and how they might manage their reputational and fiduciary risks associated with that. And once sort of getting a constructed deal done between the government and donors on how to do that, we then started to move towards more of a facilitating role, getting the parties together across line ministries, the Ministry of Finance, and across different donor actors, and started to sort of help collectively identify problems, work out how those problems can be addressed, and then also when implemented started helping these actors review progress as we went along. And then throughout the process, we also played a role as an advisor, both at a technical level. A lot of us are technocrats. I sort of classify myself as a technocrat, as a techie person. And so we put a lot of technical advice into how the solutions should be on the solutions, and also we provided political advice. But important that the agenda was shifting. It was not linear. It evolved. So we started off with an aid problem that somehow turned into local PFM, public financial management, and payroll strengthening. We helped develop a framework for thinking about service delivery, and that ended up with the design of fiscal transfers, a human resources manual, a county PFM map. Well, no, that was the other stuff, and thinking about local accountability. So there was an evolution of, one thing brought another, and we looked at solutions to that. Right, how did we manage the politics of our work? Whilst we tried to be politically smart, we actually, in many ways, deliberately avoided politics. We started building coalitions of mid-level bureaucrats and their staff, so building coalitions from the mid-level down, and on the donor side, we looked at building coalitions of the willing or the vaguely interested in terms of how to deal with these problems. And we avoided politically emotive words, such as federalism and decentralization. There were lots of high-level political debates about doing that. We talked about how to get teachers working and how to get services being delivered. But there was one instance of high-level political engagement, and that was around the budget process. When oil was shut down and then it restarted, there was space to actually put additional resources towards policy priorities, and we encouraged a simple thing. We encouraged the Minister of Finance to go and ask the President what his budget priorities were. And the President came back with health, education, water infrastructure, those types of things, which were exactly the things we were working on. So how quickly, winding up, how did we ensure lesson learning in the process? We set up formal coordination mechanisms, but they were not the most important. We actually focused on informal relationships, setting up sort of these coalitions and then feeding and lessons into that. And those relationships that were the basis of lesson learning. So what has been achieved? We have, I'm not sure if that's the last 5 seconds or the last 4 seconds. 3. We have grants to service delivery that have been made, funded by the government, and we have donor projects that are actually using government systems and supporting building capacity at the county level. And we had 4 donors lined up to give budget support, but it didn't happen. But it was nothing to do with fiduciary risk.